Welcome back to the Shadow Journal. I want you to imagine the impossible. Imagine an army of 500,000 men. They are marching through the dense, freezing forests of the Ardennes. It is May 1940. The French High Command is confident. They believe no army can move through this terrain quickly. They expect the Germans to stop, to rest, to set up camp for the night. But the Germans do not stop. For 72 hours, 3 full days and nights, they move like machines. Tank commanders remain at their hatches, their eyes wide, staring into the dark. Infantrymen march until their boots are filled with blood, yet they feel no pain. They do not sleep. They do not eat. They are possessed by a terrifying, frantic energy. The world called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. The French were paralyzed by the speed. But the secret to this lightning wasn't just in the engines of the Panzer tanks. It was hidden inside the pocket of every German soldier's tunic. A small, round pill stamped with the name Pervitin. Tonight, we unsealed the dossier on the most aggressive molecule ever synthesized, methamphetamine. This is not just a story of a drug. It is a story of how a chemical fire was used to fuel an empire, how it built a generation of supermen, and how it eventually burned the world to ashes. Chapter 1. The Alchemist's Spark 1893-1919. Visual dimly lit lab, flickering candlelight. Silhouettes of glassware. Our journey begins in the East, long before the swastika flew over Europe. In 1893, in a quiet laboratory in Tokyo, a man named Nagai Nagayoshi was searching for a way to treat respiratory illness. He was working with ephedrine, stimulant found in the Chinese herb ma huang. Nagayoshi succeeded in synthesizing the first liquid methamphetamine. But at the time, he didn't realize what he had found. It was like discovering fire in a world that hadn't invented the stove. 26 years later, in 1919, another Japanese chemist, Akira Ogata, perfected the process. He found a way to crystallize the substance. This was the birth of crystal meth. It was pure, it was potent, and it was easy to transport. But for years, it sat on a shelf, a laboratory curiosity waiting for a master who could unleash its potential. That master would be found in Germany. In the 1930s, a nation traumatized by the loss of World War I and desperate for a miracle. Chapter 2. The Temmler Miracle, 1937 to 1939 visual. Vintage German factory. High-speed machinery. Happy families in 1930s propaganda. Enter the Temmler Pharmaceutical Company in Berlin. In 1937, their lead chemist, Fritz Hauschild, observed the American success with benzodrine and decided he could do better. He used Ogata's Japanese method to create a German version. He called it Pervitin. Temmler didn't market Pervitin to criminals. They marketed it to the ideal German citizen. In 1938, Berlin was covered in posters for Pervitin. It was the housewife's little helper. It was the student's secret weapon. It was even infused into chocolates branded as Hildebrand pralines recommended for women to lighten their chores. Image: a vintage box of Pervitin chocolates. Germany was a nation in a state of collective mania. Everyone was high. Productivity was soaring. But behind the scenes, a military doctor named Otto Ranke was watching. Ranke was the director of the Research Institute of Defense Physiology. He saw that Pervitin didn't just help housewives. It turned humans into biological machines. Ranke conducted a series of brutal tests on medical students. He kept them awake for days, forcing them to solve complex equations while deprived of food and rest. He concluded, Pervitin is the perfect tool for a soldier. It eliminates the need for sleep. It eliminates the fear of death. Chapter 3. The Chemical Frontlines 194-01942. Visual, grainy 16mm combat footage. Soldiers' faces with dilated pupils. When the invasion of Poland and France began, Pervitin was no longer a medicine. It was a military ration. The German High Command ordered 35 million tablets for the invasion of the West. The Pervitin soldier was a nightmare for the Allies. They described German infantrymen who wouldn't stop even after being shot multiple times. Tank crews, high on meth, would drive for 48 hours straight, experiencing hyperfocus where they could spot an enemy tank miles away through the dust. But by 1941, the shadow began to catch up. The soldiers weren't becoming gods. They were becoming addicts. When the drug wore off, they didn't just sleep, they collapsed into a state of total soul death. They became irritable, paranoid, and violent. Many started shooting their own officers. Others died of heart failure while sitting at their desks. In the High Command, Adolf Hitler himself was succumbing to the shadow. His personal physician, Theo Morell, began injecting the Führer with a cocktail of vitamins, a glucose, and increasingly high doses of Pervitin. The leader of the master race was becoming a trembling, paranoid meth addict, making delusional military decisions while his brain was being eaten away by the fire. Chapter 4. The Fall of the Phantoms. 1943 to 1945 visual. Rubble of Berlin, cold wind. Soldiers looking like skeletons. By the end of the war, the miracle had become a curse. The German army was exhausted, and Pervitin could no longer bridge the gap between reality and delusion. In the final days in the bunker, Hitler was a shadow of a man. His hands shook uncontrollably. His eyes were vacant. He was the ultimate victim of the drug he had forced upon his nation. As the Soviet and Allied armies closed in, they found something disturbing in the German trenches. It wasn't just weapons and ammunition. They found millions of empty Pervitin tins. They found an army of men who were not just defeated by bullets, but by a chemical fire that had burned out their nervous systems. The war ended in 1945. The Nazi Empire was gone. But the molecule had just begun its global conquest. It was now a phantom soldier looking for a new home. Chapter 5. The Japanese Rubble, 1946-1955 visual. Post-war Japan. Neon flickering black markets. While Europe was rebuilding, the East was drowning. During the war, Japan had used methamphetamine, calling it Philippon to fuel its factory workers and its kamikaze pilots. When the war ended, the Japanese military had massive stockpiles of Philippon. To make a quick profit, they dumped it all onto the black market. In the ruins of Tokyo and Osaka, millions of traumatized people turned to the drug to forget the hunger and the shame of defeat. This was the world's first true meth epidemic. It wasn't about partying. It was about survival. People used it to work 20 hours a day to rebuild their country. But soon, the hospitals were filled with people experiencing Philippon psychosis. The Japanese government was forced to pass the Stimulant Control Law in 1951. But the shadow had already moved across the Pacific. Chapter 6. The Biker Labs and the Trailer. Parks 1960-1980. Visual, desert roads, leather jackets, motorcycles, dirty kitchens. In America, methamphetamine took a different form. In the 1960s, it became the fuel for the outlaw biker culture. Gangs like the Hells Angels discovered they could manufacture the drug themselves in bathtub labs. They didn't need a PhD in chemistry. They used P2P, a crude method using industrial chemicals. It was dirty, it was smelly, but it was powerful. This was the era of crank. It was used by long-haul truck drivers to cross the vast American highways and by factory workers trying to keep up with the demands of the Cold War economy. But in the 1980s, everything changed. A new group of alchemists, mostly in the rural heartland of America, found a new way to cook. They discovered that they could use common cold medicine pseudoephedrine and mix it with battery acid, drain cleaner, and fertilizer. This was the birth of shake and bake. Meth was no longer a military secret. It was a household poison. Chapter 7. The Super Labs and the Cartels 199-02026. Visual industrial scale labs, high-tech equipment, dark money. The small-scale cooks were eventually pushed out by the most dangerous players in the shadow world, the Mexican cartels. They realized that meth was more profitable than cocaine. You didn't need to wait for a harvest. You didn't need a climate like the Andes. You just needed a warehouse and a supply of precursor chemicals from China. The cartels built super labs that could produce 100 pounds of 99% pure ice in a single day. This was a new level of purity. It was no longer crank. It was crystal, and it was so powerful that it could turn a first-time user into a lifelong addict in a single weekend. Visual, blue crystals glowing under a UV light. The result was a wave of destruction that hit the rural heartlands of the world from the Midwest of America to the villages of Thailand. It became the blue shadow that ate through families, filled the prisons, and left behind a trail of meth mouth and hollowed-out lives. Chapter 8. The Anatomical Inferno. Why You Can't Stop. Visual macro shot of a brain's gray matter turning into orange flame. To understand why people will trade their children, their homes, and their souls for this drug, we must look at the biology of the inferno. In a healthy brain, dopamine is like a gentle rain that keeps the garden of the mind alive. When you eat, the rain falls. When you love, the rain falls. When you take methamphetamine, it is not rain. It is a tsunami. It releases 1,200 units of dopamine. To compare, sex releases about 200 units. Cocaine releases about 400. Meth is 3 times stronger than cocaine. It forces the brain to dump every single drop of pleasure it has ever stored. Visual, a person's face aging in time-lapse. The result is the God feeling. But the brain is not built for this. To survive, the brain begins to prune its own receptors. It kills the cells that feel pleasure to protect itself from the surge. This is the tragedy of the meth addict. After the first few times, they can no longer feel joy from anything. They are living in a permanent desert. They don't take the drug to feel good anymore. They take it just to feel not dead. The phantom soldier is now the only master they have. The conclusion: guarding the temple. Visual, a lone figure sitting on a cliff looking at the sunrise. Slow cinematic pullback. As we close the dossier on methamphetamine tonight, we see a chilling truth. This molecule was designed to make us more than human. It was designed for speed, for power, and for total control. But we were never meant to be machines. Our limitations, our need for sleep, our capacity for pain, our slow pace of life are not weaknesses. They are our protection. They are the boundaries that keep our souls intact. The phantom soldier is still out there, marching through the shadows of our cities, whispering promises of fire and light. But remember, a fire that burns twice as bright burns half as long. Breathe in the cool, slow air of the night. Appreciate the fatigue in your bones. It means you are human. It's C. Ungage, A. Lop, BN/VNCNT-do. The files are back on the shelf. The fire is out. Sleep well and stay in the light. Good night, and until the next entry in the Shadow Journal.